Before I sort of open the session and pass over to the speakers, I just want to say that can I also personally give a big thanks to Nicole Thomas, Wendy in particular, for your sponsorship, and Wilmot Dixon as well, who've supported this particular session, Reimagining Retirement Living, a new look at older people's housing. We've got a really excellent programme for you over the next hour or two, well, perhaps an hour and 45, actually, I think we've set aside, but we'll see how it goes. So if I could have the slide of the screen up with the agenda up. I just want to run through this before I hand over to Will. So our opening speaker probably needs no introduction for those of you who've attended HousingLIN events in the past or other retirement living events. Will actually was due to speak at our Manchester conference 18 months ago, which we had to pull with 3 days notice because of the onset of the pandemic. Will, you've waited a long time for us to, or perhaps we've waited a long time to catch you. I'll catch up with you again, but I'm delighted that you could be our headline speaker this morning. You're the Chief Executive of Retirement Villages Group, and I know you'll share a little bit more about both your personal journey, but also the work of the village taking retirement living forward. As I said, delighted that Wendy's with us. Our last in-person event actually was at one of those fabulous schemes that you developed with Extra Care Charitable Trust, Longbridge Retirement Village in Birmingham. Wendy's a director at Nicole Thomas Architects. Chris, I've known you for years. You're a great friend of the LIN, and I know you do a lot of work developing innovative new schemes. You're with East Midlands Housing Group, or EMH for short, Executive Director of Development. And Paul, really great that you're with us as well. Dr. Paul Willis, Associate Professor in Social Work and Social Gerontology. But the key thing at the University of Bristol, he's been leading a really innovative, exciting project with a number of operators thinking about the challenges of social inclusion within a housing setting. And that will very much bring the person to the fore. So without further ado, can I thank all of you for giving up your time this morning to join us. And invite Will to the online stage.
Great, thank you very much, Jeremy. And it's fantastic to be here, albeit on screen, and not in Manchester. If it's not too early to say Happy Christmas, everybody. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this will work okay. Has that worked?
Yeah.
Sally, yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, that's perfect.
So the first thing...
Well, you may want to go on to slideshow. Oh, there we are, yep.
The first thing to say is just to introduce myself. My name is Will Bax. I'm the Chief Executive, as Jeremy said, of the Retirement Villages Group. We are part of AXA Investment Management, who bought our business 3 or 4 years ago. And since then, we've been looking hard at how we can recast our strategy to become more relevant to the communities in and around whom we operate. And we have taken what we've done in the past and the knowledge bank that exists in our business to recast a strategy that hopes to deliver 5,000 new homes over the next 10 years. In urban connected neighbourhoods. So I'm going to speak a little bit about that this morning. The start point for us is this: we all age, and therefore this conversation is relevant to everybody. But the challenge, as we see it, is to age well. And we increasingly are looking to create a menu of options and flexibility that allow people to stay independent. That ensure that the compromises they make are minimal and ensure that we can give them freedom to focus on the things that continue to matter most. I'm going to talk about how we think about later living in 3 parts. I'm going to talk about the context, the current reality that we're operating in. Secondly, how we see the future of retirement, and particularly the retirement villages view of our customer proposition going forward. And finally, what I think we need to get there. So the current reality, most of you will be familiar with this, but we are aging and we're aging fast. And And these graphs here talk about how the population profile in the UK is changing during a 100-year period. But the relevant data points I'm going to pull out here is median age. So over the next 50 years, the median age in the UK shifts very dramatically, nearly touching 60 by 2066 from 45 today. And alongside that, and this is perhaps the more relevant statistic for us, average life expectancy is also increasing fast. Today, women live longer than men. I'm sorry to have to break that news. It won't be fresh news to you, but I am delighted to tell you that men are catching up, and by 2066, we'll have closed the gap marginally, with men likely to live to 86 and women to 90 by that point in time. The other interesting data point that I give you is by 2066, 50% of newborns will be living to 100. And that is scary, but it makes this a very sort of long-term challenging set of challenges that we need to respond to. However, housing with care has failed to keep up with this changing demographic. And I think we all understand that we now face a chronic under-provision of housing with older people. Unless we do something about that quickly, we are going to fail ourselves, but also the existing cohort of older people that society needs to look after. And these just talk to some of those figures. We think that there are 3 million people who are currently considering downsizing, moving into a more supported context, and yet the rate of new homes delivery is utterly embarrassing and gives them very limited choice and ability, indeed, to move. And alongside that, our customer is changing. They have different mindsets and they have different values. We break down sort of 4 core customer groups when we think about who we are interacting with. The ones on the left of this screen are the core customer group, the silent generation, the baby boomers. The silent generation was the first generation to contemplate early retirement. They're risk averse in terms of their attitudes to debit and credit, and they have a very strong sense of sticking to rule and order. And that's the group of people that, broadly speaking, we've been selling to over the course of the past 20 years or so, and form the basis of our existing communities. However, we're starting to see a new profile of customer come in, the baby boomers, and they're very different. 1 in 5 of them are millionaires on paper. They're time rich, they're resource rich, they travel, they're more into well-being and exercise, they eat out, they live connected lives. And interesting, they are increasingly minded to stay active economically for longer. You're looking to work into their 70s. And we have a number of people that are moving into our communities, or have moved into our communities over the last 5 years or so, who remain in at least part-time employment in doing so. We also think very hard about the influencers, and they're an important group as we recast the narrative that we have around our sector. And we look at 2 groups in particular: the squeeze generation, that's me, unfortunately. It's a generation of people that spend their time both looking after their children and their elderly parents, pressure coming from both ends of the spectrum. Interestingly, they tend to have suffered most in the financial crash of the global financial crisis. And indeed, they have been the group that have suffered economically the most during COVID. And it's also the first generation that has seen some very significant social shifts in our society, in particular the mass entry of women into the professionalized workplace. And that's an interesting structural shift that is, I think, relevant in particular to how they think. And finally, the millennials, a much maligned generation in my mind, defined by technology, social media, the expansion of cheap travel, the expansion of higher education, A generation usually invested in multiple careers, many jobs, and interestingly, most of them have a very different attitude to retirement, not least because they won't be able to retire until they're long into their 80s. So we are conscious of how these groups work, both in terms of the core customer and how their mindset has shifted, but also the influences and the conversations they have started to have with those people who need to support the choice that they make in life. We also see some very important societal changes. I guess these are mega trends in terms of how society is working. The first of those is the conversation around sustainability and the climate emergency that has clearly, as we sit here 3 weeks after COP, entered both, I guess, has started to be accepted as political ideology and mainstream thinking. And that, I think, is permeating very deeply into the business sector, and our sector has come out quite strongly with strategies supporting moves to net zero carbon, for example, as being an important part of the social license to operate. And over the course of the last month, by the way, we at Retirement Villages have been having conversations with all of our customers and communities around sustainability and what we will be seeking to do differently and what we require of them. And we wondered what we would receive by way of a response, and the response has been extraordinarily bold from our customer base, that they want us to go faster, they want us to push harder, and that this is a priority for them. Playing their part, even be it at the last chapter of life, is a priority for them in terms of the climate emergency and how we all respond. Technology, I don't need to say a lot about this, aside from saying that I think over the past 2 years, we've probably moved a decade in terms of our use of technology and how we connect, particularly to our elderly cohorts. And there is an enormous opportunity around the health and well-being agenda in particular, in terms of use of technology. And finally, well-being. I mean, lots of operators in our space talk about well-being. Generally speaking, I think that there is a attitudinal shift at a society level around how people better support their personal health, and that has been further reinforced through COVID, and therefore is not just relevant to us, but is relevant to everybody. However, we face a stigma, and that stigma is rooted in the past, and I think particularly within the integrated retirement community space, being a product that has generally been perceived as being rooted in care rather than rooted in lifestyle. And this word cloud just talks about some of the some of those perceptions, but for us, when we talk about how we break down the stigma, we talk about the stigma being the ghettoization of old people, this idea of them being communities being cut off from society, lacking in choice and diversity, too focused on care, poorly designed, and too often being considered a bad investment for those who make the move. So we think it's time for a rethink, and we think that in rethinking this, it's time to put older people back at the heart of our communities. It's time to build beautiful, open, connected places that foster social connections and help older people remain purposeful for longer. So how do we see the future? Our mission, as we see it, is to create positive life choices for older people who want to live life their way for as long as possible. And we do this by organising around the idea of longevity. And the definition of that is on the screen. It's about living for a long time. But for us, it's about remaining purposeful and useful in life for as long as possible. And we have a certain number of core principles through which we do this. And I just wanted to touch on a couple of those. The first, at the top of the screen, is integrated community. We believe that our communities should be vibrant, open, and accessible to everyone. And that last word, everyone, is important. Places that are knitted into their surroundings, that welcome both residents and locals. And that means accessible amenities that respond to local needs and support a range of activities to help residents and staff contribute to their wider community, not just within their community. Our second core principle is social connection. We understand that everyone is different, but we know that active, meaningful relationships make life easier and more rewarding. So that means ensuring that how we operate our communities is caring and supportive in allowing them to develop those particular characteristics, but also in supporting individual needs and interests. And we do that by creating carefully considered social programs of events and activities that grow relationships. Third principle is life purpose. We believe that maintaining purpose in life is key to longevity. And that means creating places that help residents to do what they love and to learn new skills to help them remain active in their community, to make friends, to stay connected. And we do that by working in partnership with others. So looking up and around within the communities that we operate and finding the right partners to help us run activities, to deliver amenities, to program classes and create opportunities for people to remain purposeful. The bottom of the screen is health and well-being. We believe that a mental, emotional and physical fitness are all key to staying active and independent for longer. And when we both think about designing our communities but also operating them, we ensure that they are active by design with amenities, activities, and importantly, open spaces that support that opportunity. So we have gyms, we host fitness classes, there are therapies, there are coaches who can advise on nutrition and exercise. We, of course, have a safety net of care available on our communities that's available 24/7, that's reactive to people's needs. But is also planned and delivered into the home where required. However, the social points that I've spoken about previously around purpose, etc., are fundamentally important to this health and well-being agenda too. Financial flexibility is the next of these principles, and we believe that giving people flexibility to make the right choice for them and alleviate the financial worries that come with later life is critical. So offering a range of products that allow people to decide how and when they pay for their home with tenor options support that. So increasingly we are renting property rather than just selling long leases. We are desperately trying to see people, help people see the benefits of part ownership. And we're exploring other innovative products such as deferred management fees, but also the ability to release equity from homes when people run into road bumps in life and need financial support. And finally, easy on the planet. This goes back to the sustainability point, but we have a strong view that everyone has a role to play in protecting our planet and reversing the climate emergency that we see as existential to humankind. And therefore we target net zero carbon for all new communities and have created a carbon fund that helps us deliver energy efficiency improvements to our existing communities too. Every one of our communities has a green group, which is resident and employee-led, and their role is to oversee a sustainability roadmap in terms of making improvements across the communities and influencing outside. So our approach is rooted in two things: placemaking and community. And for us, thriving communities mean they are open, that they're integrated with the world around them, and that they're enabling. It means they're walkable and they're connected to urban centres and all the amenities that they provide. that they have amenities that are open to everyone, not just our residents, and that those amenities respond actively to local needs. And I've spoken about the social programs that we think are important to providing that sense of purpose in life. The image you see here is our latest scheme to get planning consent in West Byfleet, where we have already broken ground. And here, the amenities that we will deliver include a public library for the town. You're looking here at a new public square in the heart of the town centre. We're delivering 17,000 square foot of retail and leisure, including gyms, public restaurants. There'll likely be a nursery and a co-working space. And that co-working space, by the way, I think will be used by not only the wider community, but also our residents. And importantly, these are places that are built for everyone. And therefore, increasingly, as we decide what we do, we go and we talk to the community around the site that we're building. We ask them what's important to them. And we talk to both older people, but we also talk to younger people and ensure that we understand what their experience of in living in these places is and how we can enhance it. And we call this idea Thrive Living. And the image you see here is another of our new schemes in Chester, just on the edge of the town centre in Chester, where we're delivering a very similar open integrated proposition. The RV strategy is to try and build a business that can operate at scale. And as I said at the outset, we're looking to build 30 to 40 new communities over the next 10 years. That's 5,000 new homes. It will play home to 7,000 to 8,000 residents, and some financial figures that are attached to that in terms of the strategy. And we see the opportunity existing across the country. Traditionally, we've been more active in the southern half of England, but our latest schemes in Chester, and we're looking at other opportunities in the north of England as well as the Midlands. Tells us that the opportunity is broadly spread, and like many of our peers, we're increasingly trying to innovate on tenure propositions that allow us to enter get right into the mid-market, where there is a huge amount of demand, but currently a lack of product, at least supplied by the private sector. And this is what we want. We want to provide an opportunity for people to live well and to age well. And on that note, I will, I'm sure my 15 minutes is up, so I shall stop.
Well, thanks very much for a real tour de force. And I know that you've generated quite a few questions and also some comments in the chat box. We'll come back to that. And I think what you put around that living well and aging well is at the heart of a lot of things that also were set out in the government's adult social care white paper last week, which is looking to see how to stimulate and to encourage a greater provision of a variety of choices where care can be supported within a housing setting. And you set out some of the language and the terminology, but I think we'll come back to that tenure shift and the propositions that you talk about, I hope, in the Q&A, because there's some really interesting facets going forward in terms of the way the marketplace will respond to that. So thanks ever so much, and please do, can I encourage people to continue putting questions into the Q&A box, and do continue putting chat comments in as well. Somebody who's lived and breathed this area for some years now is Wendy. Really pleased that she can come and follow up from you, Will, and look forward to hearing what you're saying, Wendy. Wendy from Nicol Thomas.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeremy and Sally. And thanks, Will. That was a really good presentation, and I'm pleased to say there are some slight overlaps. So we're obviously thinking along the same lines. I'll just share my presentation now for you, if you just bear with me. Let me go back. There we go. It's already stopped. I'm just going to stop sharing for a second and just start from the beginning. Just bear with me for a second. All right.
Wendy, do let us know if you want us to take over at any point.
I'm just trying to figure out. Sorry about this. This always happens, doesn't it? Right.
It worked perfectly earlier, didn't it?
It worked absolutely fine earlier. So, right, here we go. Apologies.
Yeah.
All's well that ends well, I hope. Right, okay, Reimaging Retirement Living. I'd like to thank you, Jeremy, for that title, because it is massive. And when it came, and I'm thinking, okay, you know, how do I do this? You know, what am I going to do? What am I going to focus? How am I going to control it? In reality, I didn't know until I started to put the presentation together. I've been involved in retirement for a long time. I am old enough to remember some of the earlier retirement villages. And I have to say, it is a sector and a subject that I have never found boring. It's always been interesting, and it has progressed and improved so much over the years. I just think it's fantastic that we're able to deliver these schemes for the right reasons, for the right people. I thought I would start this presentation with a question, because how often do we doubt ourselves? And really what I'm saying is, don't doubt, just do it. So what if we succeed? Let's just go forward. I was talking to my mum on Sunday. She was recently widowed last year, so she's adapting to a very new way of life. And I just spoke to her about this presentation and just sort of pulled some key words that she started to use, and I'll go through those. And this diagram really is the backbone to what this presentation is about, because what I wanted to talk about and think about was, you know, what are we doing to move forward? How are we improving? What can we do better to provide appropriate living for not just older people, but for everybody, let's be honest. She used the word choice a lot. She wanted things to be safer, kinder and healthier. And interestingly, those were her aspirations. But if you start with an aspirational position, those are the things that will probably come out of it. So if we start with choice, you can see on the screen, choice is about options, and it doesn't matter, you know, who you are, what you do, you know, those options should be attractive and they should be available to everybody. And, you know, particularly in terms of older people, Will has already mentioned, you know, that desire to be, you know, to belong and to contribute, to have a purpose. So the first choice is location, location, location. And in design terms, you know, all of these will impact on what that product will look like. Everybody, everywhere across the UK, England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, Northern Ireland, everybody deserves appropriate accommodation, and the design of those buildings will respond to the local context. So it doesn't matter if it's a rural, semi-rural, town, city location, all of those will influence on that design process. So you can see rural locations in terms of what they're likely to do. They will certainly support smaller communities, and that, you know, the building design process will respond to this through scale, massing, detail, etc. More likely to be houses, a desire for houses. Apartments will still be attractive, but probably not as great. Land values are often lower than sort of prime town centre, city centre locations. So to some degree that makes development socially more accessible, but in terms of numbers, probably the opportunities are not so great. And then by contrast, you've then got the sort of the urban location, and we're starting to see an increase in a more urban retirement model through the projects that are coming through our company. Very often numbers are higher, 200 plus apartments. And certainly, you know, the aspiration is the opportunity to regenerate towns, cities and communities. And then we've got something in between, which is obviously semi-rural, semi-urban, and you know, the issues around mixed tenure and sustainable communities. Those are the things that my mum was talking about. She was just saying, well, I like to choose where I want to live. I don't want to be told where I want to live and where I get that support from. Let's not forget pavement appeal as well. You know, part of that choice is, will I like it? And is it appropriate for me? So again, just repeating what I've said previously, there is now definitely, so as I said, I've been working within the retirement sector for 30 years, and it was unusual at one point to deliver dense schemes. By dense schemes, I mean 200 plus apartments. It's now becoming something that is much more interesting to many more operators and developers. And included in those are obviously the communal facilities that extend to the wider community. Back in the day, those communal facilities were exclusive to residents and schemes. It's now becoming much more of a community focused concept, not just a gated approach. Safer, and again, it was an interesting conversation because you know, my mum was talking about the planet, and she was saying, you know, we need to live somewhere where we can feel safe, not just now and for the future. And you know, associated with that was the whole principle around design and the issues that we're all very aware of in terms of fire, etc., particularly with Grenfell, and you know, the fact that there's an awful lot of communication around quality of the build, and no more cutting corners. So the building safety bill, I mean, obviously, you know, buildings of the future, we need to keep ourselves safe. That's going to come into force, you know, as it says on the screen there. This is related to high risk buildings, basically 18 meters high, 7 stories, which contain at least 2 residential units. From my perspective, I think it should apply to all homes, irrespective of height, irrespective of who resides in them. Gateway 1 is already in force. Now, you know, already we're making buildings safer. Just by the introduction of this bill, we're making buildings safer. We're already doing something for the future. Gateway 2 and Gateway 3 will follow in due course, probably in the next sort of 18 months to 2 years. But Gateway 1 is actually now in force, and we now have to prepare fire strategy reports as part of the planning application process. We've always done that as an organisation, as a company, and again, I think that is something to be welcomed. And so, you know, again, safer is living in safe buildings that will protect and look after you. Kinder is the climate change, you know, and this was the issue that my mum was talking about. You know, we want to live in a nice planet. We need to be kind to the planet. We need to understand how various crises, how we're impacting on our environment, and what we can do, you know, to sort of influence that and really start to be kind, not just to ourselves, but to the place that we live in. And the climate crisis is here, and we know that. Net zero strategy, Build Back Greener, carbon neutral by 2050, and it's really about how we do that. And we need to be conscious of that. And again, you know, choices, safer, kinder, these are all things that we have to think about and must continue to think about right at the beginning of that design process. The various legislation and supports that are available, the Future Home Standards, which comes into effect 2025, we hope, ensures that all new homes in England, low carbon heating systems, etc., high levels of energy efficiency. There are obviously associated with that is offsite fabrication, volumetric MMC, modular construction. Those are the sort of elements that we can be thinking about, or we need to be thinking about again early on in that design process, because they will influence what that building will look like and how it will come together, costs and speed, and how we get people into buildings very, very quickly. There are some things that we just need to be a little bit careful of, or at least be aware of, and that's the quality control systems within the factory. Based on standardization, design freeze needs to be really impacted early. Last minute design changes need to be avoided, and the quality of the final product obviously dependent on factory assembly and appropriate specialist contractors, and just be aware that any alterations made on site may invalidate that system's guarantee. Now that's just a snapshot of what we can be doing to help that process, and it's not as simple as people think. It's not as simple as we'll just build it in a factory and we'll deliver it to site. It's much more complex than that, and the decisions around that concept, that approach needs to be made very, very early, and needs commitment very, very early. So many times I've produced schemes and been asked to look at, well, how can we make this work with modular? And the answer is, well, actually you can't. You have to go back and start again. There's lots of again references, but I would particularly draw your attention to the RIBA Sustainable Outcomes Guide. Have a look at that. In simple terms, if we want to obtain carbon neutral, support and help our environment, the planet, fabric first approach, so passive design, gentle and efficient engineering. We can't disregard engineer M&E input completely, but let's use it appropriately and not just depend on that. On-site renewables, we all know about photovoltaics and ground source, heat source, and then design for usability and manageability. Very often buildings are inefficient because people don't know how to use them, and they don't know what they've got available to them to make that building more efficient. Healthier, and apologies, I'm throwing snapshots here because I think the idea, or what I wanted to do, was to get across the idea of those four simple words, and actually how they could influence and what we can be thinking, and when we should be thinking, and how we can really incorporate that into the design process. We know that COVID-19 has had an impact on the NHS. We know that there is a crisis. So what can we do as part of the design process in delivering retirement properties to help and support the NHS? And we all know that working and living together, supporting each other as a community, feeling valued, has a massive positive impact on mental health and physical health. And you've only got to look at the work that the NHS, the Extra Care Charitable Trust have done, and they have actually proven in conjunction with Aston University that their developments do deliver positive, healthy outcomes. So design aspirations, trying to keep on the theme of architecture and design. There's a whole load of references, and I've only just put a few up there just for people. But person-centered, and understand what this actually means, in design terms. So it's about talking to people, appreciating people's aspirations, culture, gender, heritage, language. We always, often, always, if we can, often go back to our scheme 6 to 12 months after they've been occupied, when we talk to people and we find out what works and what doesn't work. And we value that response and that feedback, and we do take it on board, and there are some interesting responses, and it is a valuable contribution to the design tool, and we take it forward into the next scheme. I think we also need to appreciate the longer term strategic aspirations. In other words, what is this building going to do for the future? How's it going to help people? How's it going to adapt? Our designs, our buildings again, whether it's retirement or otherwise, do need to be desirable. They need to have pavement appeal. People want people to want to move into them. They have to be viable and affordable, not just for residents, but for developers, because these are not easy buildings to deliver. And they're not cheap. They are quite complex. Future-proofing the design, we know that safety, fire, climate change, we know that all of those are coming, so we need to be aware of those, and again sort of make sure that we know what's happening strategically in the background. Our buildings for retirement need to be sociable, need to be community active, inclusive, need to support technical support, and need to allow people to live longer and healthier. Through the intervention of government support imposed, whatever language you want to use, incentives, the real desire is that we want to see excellent retirement homes being delivered as part of the norm, and not just the exception, which is really where it's been in the past. Let's make this normal. We shouldn't be talking about it, we should just be doing it. I think from my perspective, a lot of the things that we are suggesting and proposing, we do automatically, and we would do it without question. And we are, as I say, we are getting there, because certainly the conversation around retirement living is much more dominant now than it ever used to be. And so, to summarise, I think what will happen in terms of positive moving forward, I think we're going to see more considered development briefs, so a more person-centred green outcome. I think we're going to see more choice in terms of where we can reside, where we would like to retire to. I mean, if we want to make retirement accommodation aspirational, then I think we have to provide choice so that people can choose and want to go. Use of brownfield sites, I think that's imperative. We've got far too many sites now in urban locations that are just sitting there, and they're sitting there because mostly because the retirement sector can't necessarily compete with housing developers, and I think that I think that's just awful. A much more focused investment in the design process pre-planning. So, and I've got planning there, it should be planning. So making decisions about how we're going to provide the heating, M&E, power, fire strategies, structures, pre-planning, much more going back to the old ways of when the architect was lead designer pre-construction. I do think there that we'll see more collaboration with builders and contractors, because definitely with MMC offsite, carbon neutral production of and types of materials that we're going to be using, I think I think that collaboration with builders and contractors will be invaluable, and it should be a collaborative process. Again, we will be looking at obviously a more focused approach to zero carbon, both operational and embodied. So that's not just in terms of when the building is occupied, but when we're constructing it. I think because of that, we'll see a much more fabric first approach around the building form and envelope, and we've got to be careful with that. We are we are and we will become more aware and supportive of biodiversity and the value of ecology, and I think those aspects will certainly start to be seen within the design process much more than they used to be. Again, you know, it's going to become something that is fairly common and not something that's new. Prioritization of on-site renewables, again, that goes back to carbon neutral. Probably a bit more retrofit of existing buildings. This is difficult for the retirement sector because, again, in terms of level access, accessibility for anybody with wheelchairs through doorways and that sort of thing can become problematic. But again, still an important contribution to a sustainable community. And use of more technology and assisted systems. But I put up a warning there that, so all of that is great, but I do think we've got to resist the temptation of too much standardization and simplification, because, you know, then, you know, we're just going to have a series of bland, boring buildings. So there is still the desire, there still has to be the drive for design. Quality control and third-party accreditation. I think we just got to be careful with that, with some of this standardization, offsite fabrication. Just got to be very careful of that and just be mindful of it. Again, all of these are all pre-planning considerations. But, and we all know this, the planning system is the biggest challenge at the moment. And I think until we get that sorted, you know, we're climbing a hill. Even now, as I say, 30 years on from the first scheme I designed, I'm still having to explain what a retirement village is, and that is increasingly frustrating. And to be honest, it's quite boring going over the same thing every time. And so I've finished my slide, Believe You Can, and you're halfway there, which links through to the first slide, Dare to Believe. And, you know, a little bit of a whirlwind tour, not so many buildings that we've designed in that presentation, but more about the things that we should be thinking of now that will improve and will contribute to that reimagining of retirement living and the benefits that that early strategic consideration can provide.
Wendy, what a great follow-up session to Will's earlier presentation. Again, another real tour de force, and I think you sort of set out a number of issues which are really relevant for us in terms of thinking next steps as we think what the future of retirement living is, whether it's in purpose-built communities, if it's purpose-built schemes, but that integration as well. And I know Sally's posted quite a lot of information that you've drawn attention to in the chat box, including your blog for the LIN on some of that. I'm sure we'll pick up on many of the points. And I know Professor Gilroy, who's been commenting in the chat box, has been sort of making some really important points, and she also gave evidence to the TAPI inquiry, which looked at issues around technology, and we've got a session this afternoon, as it happens, on that. But let the not talk for ages, because I really want to sort of hand over the baton now for this relay over to Chris Jones, Executive Director at EMH, who also has some really exciting projects as a housing association in terms of the social housing space. So over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much. And I've got real presentation envy already, having watched those two. I mean, firstly, just to say about those two presentations, it's a good reminder for me. I love developing extra care schemes within housing associations, and I've been reminded why, so that's really helpful. I've realised I'm the squeezed generation, which is an interesting position to be in. And then finally, before I talk, glad to see Wilmot Dixon sponsored this session because they've got a mention in this presentation, so which is good news. So I'm going to quickly introduce EMH. I'm the Executive Director of Developments. I want to give a very quick overview of partnerships, and that's part of a theme here. And then the majority of the presentation will be an example scheme. I just want to talk that through, if that's okay with everybody. I hope that inspires more extra care homes to be built as we go through it for people that are new into this area. So next slide, please, Sally. This is just a quick overview of EMH and who we are. 20,000 homes. We're East Midlands based. We do touch a bit in the West Midlands, but mostly the majority of our stock's in the East Midlands. We provide the housing and care, which is a great combination, obviously, for extra care schemes. We build 600 new homes a year. They're not just extra care, unfortunately. That would be fantastic, but certainly, 15% of that will be extra care, if not larger, each year. And we have a very broad range of developments. We do supported housing of small scale as well as the larger scale extra care schemes. And we've just invested in our first modular, which will be a good test. But that is not particularly around extra care. Next slide, please, Sally. So coincidentally, this is EMH's 75th year celebration. Some people, I'm aware, Jeremy, you came to it, which was fantastic. It was a presentation recently that Chan put together. But I must say that what stands out, I mean, I joined 4 years ago, but what stands out for EMH is the partnership approach that EMH have taken, and it goes to their core, certainly with local authorities. And I know these schemes are really challenging to make happen because I'm in development, and so it has taken a lot of passionate people, a lot of trust, and real good effective partnerships. And there's just a couple of examples here. In the top left is St Mary's Court in Lutterworth. You've got Oak Court in Blaby on the top right, Waterside Court. And the bottom left is our new extra care scheme, which is 65 units that is built in Ashby-de-la-Zouch. I'll talk about that more in a minute. And there'll be another extra care scheme that is coming online, hopefully over the next year, which is 120 units in the Blaby area. What isn't shown here is some Asian elder scheme. This is something I wasn't involved in development, but EMH have, I think, about 5 schemes of the Asian elders in Leicester. That's absolutely fantastic schemes with fantastic communities. We had a tour of those about 3 years ago. I remember it well because the food they cooked was amazing. But so some great schemes and some really good purpose there. Next screen, please. Next slide, please, Sally. So this is Springfield's Ashby-de-la-Zouch 65 units extra care scheme. It is a mixed tenure scheme. There's no open market sale, but certainly social rent and shared ownership. It's a multi-generational scheme. Majority of these are for people over 55, but I think about 15 of them are for people that have a need, a care need, that are under 65. I think that's a really good mix. And when I was doing this presentation, I was reminded, I've never forgot a HousingLIN presentation, or it was a conference many, many years ago now, I attended once, and there was a professor, completely forgot his name, from Stirling University, I think, and he talked about, it's not the age you're at, it's the stage you're at. I don't know if people remember that, but it's just a really inspirational speech that's lasted with me. Anyway, multi-generational, there's people that really will benefit from this scheme and help make the scheme what it is. And so we've got that here. So that £13 million total scheme cost, and it has the general standard stuff, a bistro, hairdressers, community space that you would hope in a modern extra care scheme. Next slide, Sally. This is just the makeup of the partnership to focus on the theme of partnership. Of course, we are the housing and care provider of this scheme. And you've got the local authority, HousingLIN, of course, and the partners involved. Wilmot Dixon, of course, you're there. If you could move to the next slide, please. I had to put this view up, actually. It's just a fantastic view. It's great, isn't it? Will, you mentioned earlier about location and community. This is, it's right next to some shops. Got a primary school. There's a coffee shop opposite. There's a doctor's surgery, and so actually, with my experience, I think, you know, a great extra care scheme can largely work everywhere if there's a real demand. But if you want to bring the community into the scheme, then, you know, location really, really matters. And I think this is just perfectly located. But for the partnership in this project, of course, this always starts with a need in the local area, and the local authority helped develop that business case. But they also sourced the land, which made this scheme, you know, viable. And they invested 1.2 million into the scheme as a local authority. So that, of course, was very welcomed and helped unlock it, just as I get a phone call from somebody. Sorry about that. Homes England funded this as part of their strategic partnership programme. And again, as I said earlier, we secured the agreement to have the scheme as multi-generational, which made all the difference. Next slide, please. Again, Wilmot Dixon were engaged through a framework on the scheme. Just touch on why. I think one of the key areas, I mean, obviously a lot of experience of extra care, but they have a virtual cave. I don't know if anybody has worked on the virtual cave, but this is basically where, it's a BIM model, I understand, but you go into a room through the design stage, and there's a small space you stand in and virtually walk the scheme before a single brick has been built. I mean, you really see the design, you see where the toilets are set, you see absolutely everything, and it's really great experience and helped us walk through this. So made quite a difference. The second thing I want to mention that Wilmot Dixon helped bring to the table, I think, was this pre-contract workshop. And at this workshop, we discussed what we wanted for the project. And I remember it vividly because we had somebody who worked for us, Jo Granger, was our Executive Director of Care and Support. She doesn't work for us anymore, but she was there, and they just asked her to sort of give a feel for what was important on the scheme. And Jo passionately talked about the customers and the people there, as she always does. And I think she said something like, this is certainly more than just bricks and mortar. This is about changing lives. And she talked then about, it's about building a feeling. And building a feeling then became the key kind of mission through the project. It's the driver for the project. I think it's the key to any large project like this. If you can grab hold of something that, you know, if you talked earlier, I think about when you talked about choice, safer, kinder, healthier, I think that's what was meant by it. But we held on to that because whatever decisions we made around the scheme as the scheme progressed, it was on the basis of that driver. And any project, any partner that joined the project, again, we're introduced to that as something really important. And it became part of our marketing campaign as well, which made a difference. Just to touch on the marketing campaign, of course, we were there marketing the shared ownership, but we also market just as equally the rented properties. That's gone extremely well. By the time we handed over the property, we virtually got it full, all but two units. Next slide, please, Sally. So as I say, building a feeling became our marketing campaign. And I guess, next slide, I guess we all know what we mean by building a feeling. This isn't the same scheme, but it just gives you a sense of what we mean. And again, I was thinking the other presentation about integrated communities, feeling like you belong somewhere. These people really feel that. Pre-COVID photo, folks, pre-COVID photo. Interesting about this as well, Wendy, you mentioned earlier in your presentation about going back to old schemes and having them, these people help design the new schemes. And we'll take again the learning from our Springfield schemes into the next scheme. And I think that's absolutely vital. Next slide, please. So this is the scheme, which is now handed over about a month or so ago. I mentioned it's opposite. You've got a primary school, doctor's surgery, hairdressers. So the bistro, which is at the front of the scheme, the anticipation is we draw people in. It's got a community room as well that people can hire. You can have children's book clubs and so forth. So there's a real desire to bring the community into this scheme, to give it that vibrancy. And I think that really helps. Next scheme. Next slide. Thank you. Quick snapshot of the 2-bedroom apartment. In terms of the bathrooms, they were pods, so they were built off-site and then craned into the scheme with quite a lot of success. Really nice layout. Actually, people love it, and they love the balconies. Next slide is some photos, really, just to give you a feel for what was developed there. Next slide. There's, as well as the bistro, there's a kind of resident lounge, so there's a space for them to have some independence from the community, and this has already been particularly very well used, as we have those sort of design reviews post occupation, and people talking about what they want out of living at the scheme. Next slide. And the next slide, this is the and then the final slide, if you could, Sally, just to, this is the Bistro Area. So again, that sort of sense for me, you know, truly when you walk in there, that real sense that this is a great place to live was vital. And you know, we're really proud of what the scheme has delivered. And I know it's working because we've spoken to a number of the residents that have lived there. You can get people quite emotional about the life-changing experience they had since moving from perhaps a very isolated home into something that is community-based. So I hope that inspires some more schemes to be built if you're new at this in this area. Final slide. I think that's, for me, what we meant by building a feeling. And I think we're going to use that building a feeling as a theme through. I really like the way you've sort of, I think you've called it longevity, Will. I really like the way you've sort of presented that, and I think it's something we're going to think about more. So thank you very much. Final slide is the end of my presentation. So thank you very much, Jeremy.
Chris, thanks again. Another great presentation. It follows on really neatly from the earlier two, and also to focus down a little bit, both in terms of your strategic approach as a group, but also to think about the types of developments that you've built. And I've actually visited the Loughborough scheme with the faith communities as well, so I know exactly what you mean about looking at how to also respond to diverse communities, as well as looking at about intergenerational as well. So a great overview. And we actually also featured Springfield as an inspirational achievement as one of our features last month. So I'm sure we'll post that in the chat box for people who aren't aware of it. But the thread that we've heard this morning already about longevity, about feelings, I think Wendy talked about longing and belonging in communities and the role of hubs, you know, that connectedness is something that not everybody experiences. And our final speaker of the morning is Dr. Paul Willis, who's going to talk about a project which is around some of the real nitty-gritty issues around social exclusion and inclusiveness within retirement living. So, Paul, over to you.
Thanks, Jeremy. I'm just going to share my slides. And I'm just going to start my stopwatch so I keep an eye on time. There we go. Okay, can you hear me okay? Yep, great, good. Okay, well, it's great to be here and to join the other presenters for this session. I'm going to focus on some research findings, some new research findings from our project DICE, Diversity in Care Environments. And we're looking at social inclusion in housing with care and support for older people. This is a study that's been based and hosted by the School for Policy Studies at the University of Bristol. So this is the research team on the left in the School of Policy Studies, and we've been working with Brian Beach from the Institute of Epidemiology and Health at UCL, and Jeremy, of course, from HousingLIN, and working in collaboration with HousingLIN and the International Longevity Centre UK. And this is a 3-year project that spans across housing schemes in England and Wales and been funded by the Economic and Social Research Council. And I think what I'm going to talk about today really resonates with a lot of the themes that we've already touched on in relation to social connection, integration, social well-being, and getting that feeling of belonging and connecting with other residents within a scheme. So a little bit of background, and Will's already set the scene in relation to our study, thinking about the implications of an ageing population. And we know there's going to be a growing demand in terms of the number of older people who wish to access housing with care and support in later life. And the number of schemes is expected to grow and continue to rise in line with that. So in the DICE study, we focused on identifying how housing providers promote inclusive environments within different types of schemes that provide housing with some form of care and support. So this includes extra care schemes, independent living, sheltered living, and supported living schemes. And we're interested in exploring the social inclusion of residents in these schemes across England and Wales, and that included residents who belong to social minority groups. So when we talk about social minority groups, we mean older people who identify with social characteristics that sometimes associated with marginalised groups or people who are subject to discrimination. And this included people with physical and learning disabilities, people identifying as lesbian, gay and bisexual and trans, people identifying with Black and minority ethnic groups, and that should be groups there, and members of minority faith and religious groups. So we've had the Equality Act around for a good 10 years now, and of course that applies to private and public providers, including housing providers. And we want to know about how some of these practices have trickled down into support and work with residents. So what do we mean by social inclusion? And what you can see here is a model that we've developed within the DICE team to really tease apart what do we mean by this idea of social inclusion. And this is based on literature that's already been published, research that's already been published in ageing literature and sociological literature. So we've broken it down into 4 dimensions in terms of how we've approached the topic of social inclusion. In the top left corner there, we first of all focus on the individual identities, beliefs, and the characteristics and attributes of residents within housing schemes. And within that, thinking about the norms that are important and the values that are important to individual residents. And then connected to this, in the bottom left square there, we're talking about the social environment and dynamics within schemes. And this includes the general day-to-day interaction between residents and the way that contributes to the feeling of the scheme in terms of the social environment. In the top right corner, it's important to think about the built environment, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in relation to our findings. So the built environment within the scheme and the design of the scheme, as well as thinking about the neighbourhood location and importance of the locality and what services and amenities may be available or may not be available within that locality. And the bottom right corner, focusing on the wider structural and policy factors. And these are the policy pushes and pulls that shape this form of housing provision, as well as the wider structural factors in relation to existing inequalities experienced by residents who are part of the scheme and broader inequalities experienced by the locality and communities within which the scheme is based. So how do we do the research? It was a mixed method study, which means we used different methods to tease apart this idea about social inclusion in schemes. So we had a hard copy questionnaire, which was self-completed by residents pre-COVID, so the end of 2019, early 2020, and we received 741 questionnaires back from residents. So that represented residents from across 95 schemes in South Wales and England. And then we had a series of interviews with staff, residents and stakeholders. So we interviewed staff at 8 housing schemes and we spoke to residents across 8 housing schemes. And we also spoke to stakeholders. So these were people who were involved in commissioning work at local level and national level, policy and advocacy work, representatives of different housing providers and housing organisations that represent diverse groups of older people. And finally, we had a series of longitudinal interviews. So these were a series of interviews over 18 months, where we focused specifically on residents who identified with minority groups. And this was important, so we made sure that we captured their perspectives and their experiences in the data. And so we had 21 residents who took part in at least one interview, 4 people who continued to be interviewed twice, and 14 people who took part in 3 interviews. And this extended over the first the first lockdowns during 2020. Okay, so I'm going to just focus on the perspectives of residents, what we learned from residents in this particular presentation. And you can see here a graph just outlining some of the key characteristics of our participants. These are people who took part in interviews, both longitudinal interviews and single interviews. So we have a total of 72 participants. We put them all together. Participants range between 54 to 95 years of age. The mean age was 72. Overwhelming majority were women. There was around about even numbers of people from extra care and retirement living. We have small numbers of residents who identified with Black and minority ethnic groups, and a small number who identified with minority faith groups. And we have a slightly larger number of people who identified as lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans. And unsurprisingly, majority of people taking part in the study, both in the interviews and in the survey, were experiencing living with a disability or experiencing a chronic illness. And I say unsurprisingly because this is what we could expect with this particular population who are seeking to continue independent living, but with some kind of care and support around them as well. So that just gives a flavour of who we spoke to. What do they have to say? Well, these were some of the factors that facilitated social inclusion and social connections within schemes. Some residents talked about the importance of shared identities and being newbies together, particularly when moving into schemes together and establishing those new relationships and feeling like you weren't the only one who was new to the scheme. People talked about supportive neighbours, people who are welcoming, and this included invitations to social events or helping others out or offering to help others out, particularly again when people were new to schemes. External connections are really important, particularly for residents who are already embedded within that locality. So that worked really well in terms of being able to maintain social connections and having already been embedded in that community and having existing social networks and ties that people look to outside the scheme, as well as looking to new relationships and connections within the scheme. Active participation in scheme life is really important, and this happened in lots of different ways through resident associations and committees, through being involved in gardening and green care, being involved in activities that welcomed new residents. The presence of on-site staff, and this was reiterated again and again across our study by residents. And this is interesting at a time when a lot of housing providers are moving towards floating support, where there are less staff located on site. But it was clear from our conversations with residents that it was important that they had a relationship, a connection with people who were located on site on a regular basis. So these were staff members, and they could be people involved in reception, people involved in administration, people involved in estates management. But people who really knew the residents, who saw them every day, and you could spot when some residents were socially withdrawn and were not engaging within scheme life, were able to encourage engagement and participation and support their involvement. And similarly, we saw close connections with carers, so people who were receiving daily care and support. Carers played a really important role in terms of picking up on social withdrawal of residents and checking in regularly with residents about their social well-being, as well as, of course, supporting people with their physical well-being. The physical design was a really important dimension. And again, this resonates with some of the other work that's been presented in this session today. Balconies and garden patios were really important spaces for facilitating social interaction, even more so during the 2020 lockdowns, where people were able to have doorstop or balcony conversations with each other, or join in group activities where people were able to be on their doorsteps or be in their patios, but still be socially distanced, and be part of, for example, group exercise on doorsteps. We also found that communal spaces, such as restaurants, craft rooms and club spaces, atrium areas, were all really important spaces for supporting social interaction and supporting a sense of social inclusion. And again, even more critical during those 2020 lockdowns, helping to break social isolation. Interestingly, some older sites didn't have these communal spaces. So where these were lacking, residents sometimes created their own informal spaces, but these are not sustainable spaces because often they were car parks or laundry areas, so they weren't well suited. They didn't necessarily support interaction in their design, but they've been created as these spaces, and were obviously limited in terms of use and particularly around weather. But community areas and rooms were sometimes also exclusionary spaces or experienceless exclusionary spaces. So sometimes there were conflicts between different resident subgroups, or what were sometimes referred to as cliques within schemes. And this is where it was really important to see staff actively and rapidly responding to where some of these subgroup divisions emerged, and being able to support the residents who are experiencing this. And digital infrastructure was vital. And again, this was particularly emphasised during the lockdowns, and being able to have access to the Wi-Fi, have a good Wi-Fi connection across apartments as well as in communal areas, being able to text and email loved ones, and be able to have video calls during those periods of isolation and self-quarantine. Some barriers to social inclusion and connections. Lack of social activities and communal spaces, as I've already touched on. Some residents felt that social activities and events were more appealing to women, and some residents who identified as lesbian, gay, bisexual talked about how some of the activities were more appealing to heterosexual women. A lack of staff on site was cited as a barrier for residents, particularly those who required some additional support to attend social events and activities, and this included people with physical disabilities. And there's sometimes a tension around encouraging resident involvement versus respecting residents' independence. And I suppose this is a wider tension around how we respect people's individual private space and individual private lives, but how we also create a sense of community and a good neighbourhood connection in terms of supporting people to be involved in the social life schemes. And as I've also touched on, the formation of sometimes dominant resident groups, which sometimes led to the creation of no-go zones for some residents, where some residents would avoid traversing through shared areas or communal spaces in relation to feeling intimidated by other residents. We also found examples of boundary setting between residents. And this is more specifically in relation to residents who identified with minority identities. So while we didn't find that social isolation was a significant problem across our sample, we did find a more of an acute problem for residents who identified with minority groups. And they spoke about feeling more isolated, perhaps less connected with social activities within the scheme, and looking more outward for social connections, particularly groups and communities that reflected their own identities or had some kind of shared experience, and often made active choices not to participate in scheme life. But we also saw examples of boundary setting where residents who didn't identify with minority groups, sometimes in their conversations and in their regular comments, conveyed expressions which set up boundaries on the basis of sexual identity, gender identity, and ethnic identity. And you can see a couple of examples there on the right side. We also saw boundary setting on the basis of disability. and exclusion on the basis of cognitive and learning disabilities and dementia. And we sometimes heard some exclusionary comments in our interviews with some residents, particularly towards people with dementia, that people didn't belong here and that there are too many people with high support needs which can't be accommodated in this kind of living scheme, or that people with dementia would be better located in a care and nursing home rather than in an extra care or supported living environment. And we also heard from residents of physical disabilities some of the barriers in relation to accessible communication between staff and residents, and how some of the physical design, including communal areas, didn't facilitate their involvement. So, for example, some communal areas not being wheelchair accessible. To finish up, because I think I am well and truly I am out of time, just some recommendations for housing providers and staff. We think it's important to invest in staff on site, as they are fundamental for building and maintaining an inclusive environment. We also think it's important to provide continuous training around social inclusion, particularly around bringing staff awareness to accumulated disadvantage that can build across older people's lives, particularly older people who belong to minority groups, and how this can complicate feeling included and feeling valued within housing with care. Important to engage early and proactively with residents belonging to minority groups. And I think it's also important to support residents to contribute to the design, both the social design and physical design of housing schemes. And I think the virtual cave idea that Chris mentioned earlier sounds really exciting, and it'd be great if residents could be involved in those kind of activities. And the investment in communal areas and the social value of diverse activities on site that are both inward facing and outward facing. And I say outward facing because a lot of older buildings will not have communal areas, as we discovered in our study. And so it's important to be able to look at what's available in the locality or in the local area in terms of services and community spaces that could become alternative communal areas for residents within that scheme. And also a key recommendation in terms of ensuring all schemes have a good digital infrastructure as being integral to social inclusion. We've got our virtual launch event on the 27th of January, that it's hosted online, free to register, and it'll be hosted by the International Longevity Centre. We really hope you can join us, and I'll pop a link to register for that in the chat box. We've got a small residence launch in Bristol early 2022, where we want to celebrate what we've achieved through the study with a group of residents who are being connected to the study. We're producing a learning resource for staff that includes a series of podcasts about diverse residents' life stories and experiences in these kind of housing schemes. And we'll also include some accompanying learning materials, and that will be hosted on the HousingLIN website. And we'll be developing a practice briefing for managers and staff, which will also be hosted on the HousingLIN website. Thanks very much. That's us on Twitter and our website. I'll pop that in the chat box too.
Paul, thanks ever so. That's a really great way to end the morning sessions, and I think you've given us plenty of food for thought, and it's really sort of linked in neatly, I think, from all the presentations. And Diana, I think in the chat box has said something, and Heather Sinclair's just put something else as well, how important this is to think about not just about the design of the physical space, but also in terms of operating that social space. And I know whether it's Will, Chris or Wendy, they always think that in terms of whether it's design from an architecture or a developer or as an operator as well. So some really important thing. I think what the other thing is that you mentioned at the end is that you engage very much with the residents themselves. So this is not just, this is very much an applied learning and co-produced and co-designed with those residents. So thanks ever so much for drawing that to our attention. I look forward to us highlighting and supporting the launch in January and the subsequent briefings as well. So that draws the presentations to a close, and I hope, like me, you think they have been absolutely fantastic contributions to think about how we do reimagine retirement living. Plenty of information both in the chat box and the Q&As, and I see quite a few people have upvoted various questions, and I don't know whether any of you have had a chance who've spoken to have a look. But there's no doubt that Diana's question about affordability has got the most thumbs up. And I think whether it's around Retirement Villages Group, EMH, or the work that Wendy does and many of the social housing provide, the question is about affordability and how do you manage the differences in people's finances? It seems to me that it's targeted very much as, and I think this is probably more directed at you, Will, around the middle classes. You talked about the squeezed middle, but she also highlights that poverty is a growing issue. So, Will, can I kick off with you? Because I think that it's a question for all of us. It's not just something that is much at the forefront of your mind.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's a good question. I think to start with, I'd say that housing provision has been poor across each market segment. In some ways, it's been better at the affordable end, actually, in terms of delivery than it has the middle market. I don't think we need to talk about the sort of the higher end markets in response to this question. But when you see the long term trends in terms of housing delivery, the aggregate number has fluctuated of units delivered to the market has fluctuated between 6,000 and 10,000 per annum for a period, and most of those have been, I would say, they've either been at the upper end of the market or they've been at the lower end, the affordable end of the market, and there's been very little in the middle, and that's why we sort of see that as an under provided for segment. Now, what I would say is we all do slightly different things. So, Chris is focusing at the more affordable end. I'm focusing in the mid-market. You've got operators like Audley and Riverstone coming, who are coming into the space focusing on that higher end. And there's a place for all of that. The devices we use around affordability in an urban context is seeking to build at density. Where we can build at density, we can, generally speaking, size a product that tends to be more affordable. We ensure that the product is appropriate to the market within which we're building. So that's different in rugby, for example, to that we might be building in West Byfleet, the scheme that I mentioned a moment ago. And the price points are different, corresponding to the house market economics in those locations. And to give you some data points around that, the houses, the apartments that we deliver in West Byfleet will start at 400,000 on second-hand communities, which is delivering a very good refurbished product. We might be in other parts of the country, actually not too far away. Let me take a comparable example. Cranley down the road we'll be able to start that pricing at about 250,000 for a new home. But they run up to up the scale to larger apartments that would be significantly in excess of that. The other device we use is the tenure. And the rental in the mid and upper end of the market has been almost non-existent until the last couple of years. It's been a tenure that has penetrated principally in the more affordable end of the housing market, the housing with care market. We see a massive uptick in rentals, both for probably a slightly older buyer group who are don't see any interest in owning their home forever, but like the flexibility that rental affords them. We see part ownership as a very good device to drive affordability, and for us that's offering a 50% for sale and 50% for rent basis for people to contract with us. And we also are looking at quite innovative ways of using an event fee structure to allow people to manage their outgoings during the period that they stay in our communities for, so to offset for some of the management fees. And usually when we talk to our customers, they generally look at income and the affordability of being able to service management fees as a prerequisite for being able to make the choice. to move into these settings. So there are lots of things going on in response to that question, but I would say that the sort of key things are we're all doing something slightly different. Generally speaking, the mid-market hasn't been provided for. Your more affordable end of the spectrum has been quite well provided for in the past, and I hope will continue to be that way. The more luxury end of the spectrum has seen some supply. We see the challenge that we're responding to as being that mid-market section, but there's space for everyone.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. So I'm just wondering whether Chris or Wendy want to come back as well, because whether you're operating and developing schemes where you might be reliant on, and Chris, I think in your presentation you talked about social housing grant and the role of the Homes England, and Wendy, some of your schemes have also had the benefit of cash funding or funding from public sector. Does that mean that affordability is much linked to a social housing offer? Because I think, Chris, you talked about developing shared ownership and other mixed tenure type developments. So over to you, Chris, first.
Yeah, thanks. We do. So in my experience, there could be 3 tenures in the larger schemes. So market sale, there'll be shared ownership, and there'll be social rent or affordable rent. The example I gave was social rent and shared ownership only. And you're right, how do you make that a viable scheme? Because that's the challenge. And the answer to that is grant. Low land values, local authorities might unlock the land value, so there's funding that way. They might even, and they did in this scheme, put some funding towards it, and all of that enables that affordability. So the shared ownership, for example, I think these were about 220,000. Some of the units. Somebody might own a property, they'll sell that and put in perhaps 60% of that on the shared ownership. So 132,000 this, somebody's going to tell me my maths is wrong, and then a small amount of money for the rental element of it, and then the service charge. So the shared ownership is very affordable for people who own an asset, and then the social rent is fantastic, of course. But you need the grant. You need to make it viable, and you don't want to reduce the quality, because that's really, really important. That this is a home first and foremost. How you pay for it and how it's paid for is different. So
Wendy, when you come to sort of talking to your clients who are looking at tenure diversity, looking at land, I mean, we'll probably think, God, given a lovely piece of land for £1, that's an anathema to him. But on the other hand, you might be working across different clients who will be juggling those decisions, and planning obviously is one of those. But are there any other telltale factors that you think are coming through?
There's no question that the middle market is starting to come through, and it is linking those two extremes. The top end, which is luxury private, and then that other end, which is often considered to be social, but actually isn't. Chris is absolutely right. The quality of those buildings and designs do not reflect in any way a poor man's choice. On the contrary, but there is this gap, and it is starting to filter through. It's starting to filter through, really supported from what we're seeing through private investment. It's much more aggressive in terms of viability, but it is definitely become something that everybody, well, not everybody, but this becomes something that is become quite focused. So I think, it's like I said in my presentation, it's about choice. And it's about choosing where you want to live, how much you want to spend, whether you want to be in a large scheme or a small scheme by the seaside, in the middle of Birmingham or London, or in Scotland. It's about choice, and in terms of the quality and the design, it's really managing and manipulating that funding stream to get the best out of the design and the best out of the space. So it may be that we have to go denser to be able to support a viability, or it might be that actually there is plenty of funding and it's the complete opposite, and we're going for something that is much more rural and a little bit more sort of countrified. So yeah, to answer the question, it's a broad spectrum, and both Chris and Will have really said what we're seeing out there. The biggest thing is the middle market. It is starting to show a lot of interest and a lot of movement.
I'll come back to that rural, urban, suburban, because it felt to me that Will was trying to say that RVG are trying to reposition themselves as more of an urban-centric. I know some of your schemes have been more urban, rural in the past, but I actually want to come back to something first, if I may, and that's Dean sort of highlights issues around disability. And Paul, you talked about some of the experiences of people living with disability in retirement housing, and Dean talks about a term from the disability community called "nothing with us without us." Now, I see that very much as part of that journey of co-production. Were there examples where you think that sort of connectedness and co-production within communities can sort of work with that sort of type of approach, nothing with us without us?
Sure. I mean, there are lots of, we saw lots of really good examples of housing schemes actively supporting residents, including residents with disabilities, to have a voice in scheme life and what social activities look like. And we also spoke to residents, more so residents of physical disabilities, where transitioning into the scheme had been a really positive experience. And to quote one person that I interviewed, he thought it was one of the best places he'd lived across his lifetime. So there were some really good examples there. And we also heard examples from stakeholders, because we're having a series of stakeholder events. And in relation to going back to, if I can go just focus on dementia, we've heard of examples of schemes that host dementia cafes within the scheme. So that's the Dementia Cafe, the people running the scheme, coming into the scheme itself and using the communal spaces that are available, cafes, for example, or kitchen areas, to host an event for external people. But also the co-production comes in involving residents who help to run this particular cafe. So it's a really lovely example of that, not necessarily co-design, but kind of co-running and co-facilitating this event that kind of crosses that barrier between, within the scheme and initiatives happening outside the scheme. And I'd be interested to see if these kind of activities are more widespread, whether that would help shift some of the exclusionary thinking that we encountered from some residents about that people with dementia don't belong here, and that kind of othering that we see.
No, that's really helpful. Just thinking about sort of the question that was posed, I think around sort of numbers. Somebody said, about, was it Claire or Alison was talking earlier about, the numbers, and I think Will, you said, we actually got a real shortfall in demand versus supply that's being developed. Any sort of thoughts about whether that's likely to be more in 2021, or whether the last couple of years of COVID have meant that it's actually been difficult, or are there other system challenges? And actually, Chris, you might have a view as well about how easy it is to access materials and contractors as well. So, Chris has given thumbs down for that already. But Will, any thoughts about sort of how to boost some of this supply?
Yeah, well, I think I put the number 7,000 homes, which I think was actually the 2019, the year prior to COVID, delivery. Yeah. And it's kind of bumped along at that kind of level for some time. That's total, by the way. That's includes affordable and sort of general market supply in the sector. The pipelines are clearly growing. And you see that delivery rate. If you look at some of the forecasts over the next 5 years, you see that start to grow fairly significantly towards 20,000, I think, in one of the recent research pieces I saw. But clearly, we all are. I'm sure Chris feels this as well. We're all challenged by the short-term issues that exist in the construction space around availability of labour and pricing of materials in particular, that is creating, I think, a relatively short-term viability crunch, and therefore I would anticipate that we'll see some impact from that in terms of short-term delivery.
Any thoughts on that? And also Wendy, because it may be something your clients are also faced with. Chris, first.
Yeah, thanks. No, just reminded, building for us the extra care scheme is really, really challenging, every step of the way. And Wendy mentioned earlier the planning process, not least the planning process, which is causing issues. And yes, labour and materials are causing some real challenges, and it's slowing down our programmes. This isn't just extra care, this is across the board. So really, really, really challenging. I think it's why it's important that you get passionate people involved, because it's so hard. You either ought to be passionate in order to see these challenges through. But demand for extra care in the market, certainly supported housing market and the shared ownership market is massive. We could have sold and rented Springfields times 3, in the same period. So I haven't got the exact statistics around the East Midlands, but I know it's growing and there's not enough built, if that helps. But yeah, it's really, really challenging. And we talked about the land for a pound. We don't always get the land for a pound, but seriously, the cheaper, I guess, the land and the more funding has been put into it, the higher social rent. And the opposite is true. The more sort of shared ownership, maybe market style, we need to introduce to bridge the gap. If for normal schemes, we do both.
And Wendy, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, without question, the planning process is the biggest bottleneck. We've had projects that, even though they were decided through delegated powers, have taken 18 months to come to a decision. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. It's crazy. We're also seeing issues with labour and materials supply. And we're also seeing issues around tenders that are coming in, in terms of what those figures are looking like and how quickly the decision to accept that tender has become because of fear of increase in prices and being able to secure suppliers and subcontractors. So there's a whole sort of cocktail of what has affected, or what is affecting, the delivery at the moment. Planning has been there forever and it will continue to be. I don't think it's ever going to be easy, and it's up to us to massage that system, if you like. But certainly the issues around the pandemic and what that's done in terms of availability of labour and materials is the biggest impact at the moment.
Yeah. So in fact, it seems to me that we've got great vision, we've got great ambition. We've talked today about the potential that both our existing stock and improving our existing stock, as well as developing new schemes. There's an attractive customer offer here, but there are still some blockages along the way, whether it is around materials, labour costs, planning. And in fact, on the planning front, we've been liaising with Tetlow King Planning about a potential new blog next week or two before Christmas about some precedents that have been recently set, which are quite helpful along the way. But it also seems to me some of the things coming out of the white paper, which is about incentives to invest capital funding, we also perhaps need some greater way of levelling that playing field on the planning front as well. And perhaps that's the debate to be had at another event. But I'm conscious that we're very rapidly coming to an end. And I really just want to say, are there any final words that all four of you would like to say before I wrap up? Because you've really given us plenty, as I said, food for thought.
I just follow up on that the planning point, Jeremy. I think the key issue is housing delivery won't change demonstrably and in the way it needs to without both planning but also financial regulatory control reform. And I think that the social care white paper is a good step in the right direction. I mean, they've called out integrated housing as being a lever, probably for the first time in any sort of meaningful way. And we, alongside others, particularly within the ARCO universe, will be going to government with some quite clear asks that actually we don't think cost government anything. And those are the requirements for local authorities to have a housing with care allocation within local plans, and the FCA to ensure that consumer credit regulations enable the sort of financial innovation that we're seeing around tenure. if we see those changes and the government works with the sector, I think we'll see the taps get turned on. But it requires leadership, and we haven't seen that leadership from government before now. So that, there's an opportunity, but we'll wait to see whether or not they're willing to grit the metal.
Thanks. Chris?
Yeah, just quickly, I know we've talked more recently about saying it's really hard, and it is really hard, and you need to be passionate about it to see it through. We will continually going for it and driving it through and making it possible through partnerships. So I just wanted to say that, despite the challenges, despite the planning and labour and materials, it is so important and it makes such a difference. So we're going to keep on going and keep on building the feeling. I've got that in.
Well done, and you certainly did that, and the 75th anniversary celebrations last week demonstrate that. Wendy and then Paul.
I think what I would say from a sort of a design architectural perspective is just continue to enjoy designing these buildings, because they're fantastic, and it doesn't matter if it's a retirement village, a small dementia care home, or somebody's home. Just enjoy designing to allow people to continue to live for as long as they want to within those places, and appreciate what people need. There are challenges around delivery. I mean, it is a multi-layered process. It's more complicated than people actually appreciate, but the rewards when you get to the end are just fantastic.
And Paul?
I just saw Bob Green's comment, question about will all communities be included in the reimagining of retirement living, and he refers to a number of different minority groups there. And I think it's really important for housing providers to have that proactive engagement with community groups that represent diverse groups and minority groups, and have that engagement much earlier in terms of designing and planning of schemes, and have their involvement in scheme life. So that would help schemes move beyond providing non-discriminatory environments to providing really fully inclusive environments.
Yeah, thanks. And there is a big legacy of monoculture in much of our retirement living schemes, and we need to really brace that. And anybody who joined us for Jackie Revolution presentation, she really threw it at us yesterday afternoon in her presentation around that. Look, I'm conscious we've overrun slightly. Many thanks for all the participants who stayed with us, but also can I thank all of you who presented, Will, Wendy, Chris and Paul, for your great presentations this morning and spending the morning with us. Can I thank Sally and Jerome behind the scenes for all their support, and can I also thank Nicole Thomas and Wilmot Dixon for your sponsorship. It's really helped us enable this to go forward. Then several things I could go on about. Just to say, if you enjoyed the issues around technology that were raised today, this afternoon we have our technology session, which we look at the findings from the TAPI inquiry, chaired by Susan Kay from Dunhill Medical Trust. And Will raised a really important point about leadership. And we have a session with the Chief Exec of the National Housing Federation, Kate Henderson, tomorrow on how can we grow that sector leadership, where we will also be announcing the Future Leaders Programme and our cohort that will start next year. So thanks ever so much, all of you. The slides, the recording will be available shortly. And can I just wish you a happy afternoon. Bye, everybody.
Thanks very much. Cheers.